All right. Good day, everyone. And thank you for joining me. So, Mental Health Awareness Month means nothing if we are still managing people like they are machines within boxes, right? So, of course, none of us are doing this. This is absurd, right? Or is it? Well, good day, everyone. I am Christina Green and your generational translator. Welcome to the Generational Edge podcast. Today, we're talking about how to stop ignoring mental health at work. Now, according to the Society for HR Management, mental health related leaves of absences increased by 33% in 2023. And given the climate of our global community, this topic couldn't be more relevant. So, we're going to start it here, but we're not going to end it here. This is where we need to continue to have this conversation about welcoming the discussion around mental health in the workplace. And it doesn't have to be around therapy. This is not about coddling one another. This is about a self awareness and awareness of the importance of having this conversation in that space. All right. Now, we're all raised and conditioned to perform rather than be authentic humans in the workplace. And this contributes to 74% of employees report that a negative mental health experience at work, according to Forbes. Now, we've been taught to hide our true selves out of fear of judgment, possibly having a career consequence, maybe being labeled as one thing or the other, or maybe not fitting in. How about also to internalizing, our own internalized conditioning? All of these things are impacting how it is that we show up in our various spaces. How do we leverage our true selves or full selves at work? So let's talk about this a bit more. What's the problem? Well, we have branded this idea of mental health, but we've not integrated it. We've not embedded it into our day to day. It's viewed as extra rather than being something that we truly live, right? Making it part of our day to day and how it is that we communicate with one another. When it is that we expect turnaround times on responses, right? Is it I expect an immediate response, or is it that I understand that I am not necessarily anyone else's priority? So I will send them a message and they will respond when is necessary, right? So, what are the expectations that we're using to interact with one another? We're widening this gap between what is said, what is spoken out loud, and what's actually felt, right? We know that especially here in the US, the tendency is to lean into this facade or this mask of I'm good. Oh, I'm fine. Everything's good. If you live anywhere on this planet, you know that that's not an accurate statement for most of us. At any given time, we are experiencing and feeling some kind of fluctuation. And it's okay for us to be able to express that. Now, how we do that in the workplace is based on our culture. It's based on our upbringing. It's based on the space that is held for us in the workspace. There's outdated ideals of what professionalism looks like, and that remains a priority for leadership, right? There is a physical view of what this looks like, right? Professionalism looks like a certain attire. It sounds like a certain speech or language that's used. We tend to Emotional detachment is rewarded as a strength, while people who are suffering, they keep that to themselves. It's below the surface, right? They never really bring it out. Vulnerability is viewed as risky unless it's tied to this toxic hustle culture. Leadership is okay with mental health being a conversation, being an agenda item, so long as it doesn't impact the deadlines, right? We also too There's these generational blind spots that really only make this worse, that we are not talking about, right? Because each generation has learned different rules about mental health at work and how to show up in that space. And these silent rules are governing how people are engaging with one another, how they are interpreting the actions, the behaviors, the words of their leadership. and how they're showing up and supporting or not for one another. Now, culture is what we tolerate, or it's what we cultivate. When we deprioritize actions of modeling this behavior or openly discussing what mental health looks like in the confines of your team within the organization and building around around mental health, this sends a louder message than any policy that you can roll out. Now, if you've ever wondered why people are checking out quietly or quiet quitting, or they are staying guarded, or they're not engaging with holding their insights in meetings and conversations, it's not because they don't care. In fact, they actually do care, but they have been taught by the workplace that they can't trust what happens when they are honest, when they show up fully. And that is the reason for this conversation. Now, why do I even care about any of this, about intergenerational communication, about mental health in the workplace? Well, I was a Gen X leader, and I followed what I was told. I took the playbook, I pushed through, I kept it professional, and I left my true self at home. I followed that corporate playbook to the T, and I just found that people were burning out. I found that people were disengaged. And this was all because we were leading from a perspective of these outdated norms, this unspoken rules that people weren't talking about, this hand-me-down beliefs that the workplace is supposed to be something that it isn't, which is a family. And that's when I realized that the culture is not given to us by HR, is in fact cultivated at each leader level. And now I get to help organizations build these generationally intelligent teams where support isn't a perk, it's how we lead. It's our intention behind how we lead. So now there's no more suffering in silence, right? When we start having these conversations, there's no more survival mentality. Because when people feel safe to show up fully, they stay, they grow, and they start to become leaders. Okay, so now let's break down these generational rules that are governing each generation in the workplace. Okay, so we're going to dive into the messaging that each generation has received, and we're going to do this across 5 generations. We're going to discuss the foundation of their work culture, how this and how the impact of their mental health, how this is showing up today in the workplace, and what they need, what type of support they need in order to be successful. All right. Now, first, the boomers, right? So, what mental health messaging have they received? So, baby boomers, of course, we know they were born as post World War II, right? So, they're growing up during the fight of the civil rights movement right here in the US. And so, they were taught to be strong, right? To not to express your emotions, not to dive too much or really lean too heavily on your own feelings. This was in their personal lives, and so they brought this into the workplace. They were taught to push through. So this is how they showed up at work, right? They believed that the work culture was loyalty equaled valued, to be valuable and to be valued and appreciated in that space. That long hours, in fact, was a badge of honor. It was to be prideful of having done that, or prideful for showing up that way, right? And how this shows up today is they don't ask for help typically because they can do this on their own. They've not had to do this in their lives, so they've had to navigate this space and find their way through by themselves. They can be dismissive of mental health, right? So when you need to take a mental health day, they likely don't really understand what that means, because or they understand what it means, but they're not bought into understanding the purpose for it and why does this have to impact your work? Why can't you deal with your mental health in off hours, right? Just like everyone else. And so because this is not how they were raised and it's not the work culture that they grew up or developed in. They view the emotions as weakness, right? So remember, we're talking about being raised in the late 40s into the early 60s. Okay. So this is a different mentality with how it is that the environment was that they were experiencing, right? So this is how they were approaching work because we know that life and work, they mix. We bring ourselves to work and those values shape how it is that we interact with one another. Now, how can we support them? Give them permission to pause. Give them the permission to give themselves permission to pause, to be respectful in your dialogue with them, because respect is one of the highest values for baby boomers, right? Reframe that rest and excuse me, reframe what rest means, right? To make it supportive of them instead of, a saloon door, right? Or a boomerang that's just going to hit them, on the back end once they make that decision. Or help them to understand that rest really is a performance strategy. It's not a character flaw. And it's not something that needs to be earned. Also, too, so now let's move over to Gen X, right? So the messaging that Gen X has received around mental health is of one of self-reliance, right? We know that Gen X is also to the generation that basically raised themselves, right? The latchkey children of all of the generations. They had a key to the house. They walked to and from most places that they were going to, and they've taken this messaging into the workplace to say, I have to handle this myself. So they're very independent in that space. You've heard me talk about this before, where even when they approach different projects, they would rather just do this on their own, right? Highly independent. And that is because this is a hallmark of their generation, right? This is how they were raised. Now, the disclaimer I should have gave earlier is that this is just a baseline across all the generations. Every single individual will embody some of these characteristics in different ways. Okay. So this is not a pinpoint target for each and every individual that is in the generation, but understanding the foundation that has helped to shape who they are and how they show up in the workplace. Now, the work culture for Gen X has been one of independence. They are highly skeptical of in their approach to what work looks like, especially coming down from leadership, especially with working with younger generations. This is just part of the foundation, right? Part of the culture that they have formed in this space. They are the head down achievers, right? They dive in, they do their work, and they are highly achieving. So, and they will do a good job because to be honest, most of them they've been in the corporate space, they've been in their roles, they've been in their industries for decades. So they have the foundation to stand upon, right? That makes them experts or subject matter experts in their field. Now, how this shows up today is that they are quietly, right, internally, very deeply burnt out. And I know this from having spoken to, you know, dozens, if not 100 different Gen X leaders over the course of my career. And what it sounds like today is it sounds exhausted. It sounds like I've run this race and for what, right? So it's kind of this moment of surrender of this is what it is, this is where I am, and I'm just also too very tired. This can also look like burnout, right? And they don't speak about this. They don't come out with it. They may share this privately, but this isn't coming into the workplace. They're not going to raise their hand and say, I need a mental health day, right? They are also too are managing without modeling that support. So they are leading various teams in a way that they are following the playbook, but they also too are feeling at a tug of war of figuring out how to actually create that space for their team. That in many ways are some of the younger generations. How are they creating that space for their teams to feel supported in being able to take some of that mental health power back, right? And so they don't know how to do that. They don't feel supported. Well, how can we support them in this space? Use tactical language, right? Because Gen Xers can be very task oriented, very tactical, logical, pragmatic in how it is that they approach their initiatives, their projects, the work that they are doing, right? What they are responsible for, and encourage them to be vulnerable without that overexposure. This is not about holding public group sessions or group therapy sessions. This is about allowing them to have a voice in a space that says, hey, even if it's just directly with their leader, and to create that confidence, right? For them to be able to come in and say, listen, this is what I'm experiencing. I think I need to, you know, do these things. I think I need to take some time to reset, right? You'll also find that even with boomers and Gen X, they typically have a lot of PTO that they have not used, and that's because it is more important to them to do a good job and to have the visibility of being reliable and dependable in this space. So, how do you support them is by encouraging them to recognize that they have their own limitations. We all do as humans. And it doesn't mean that they are bad or incapable. It just means that there's a reason that PTO exists. There's a reason why we should be able to step back and say, let's let somebody else handle that, right? So there's a lot of ways that we can show up and be supportive for Gen X in the workplace, and these are a few. All right, next, Zennials. I always talk about Zennials. They are the bridge generation, about 25 million of them, right? Much fewer than all of the other generations, but nonetheless important. What is the mental health messaging that they've received? Well, being the bridge between Gen X and millennials, they have been handed down this idea of be self-reliant and and just suck it up, right? So just take care of what you need to, but don't make it anybody else's problem. So seek your own self-help, right? So heavy into reading of the self-help books, motivational speaking, and listening to a lot of that, and absorbing that as to how it is that you can self-counsel, as opposed to leading into trying to get that help from your leadership, right? How instead of requesting for your leaders to actually pour into you, that instead you are in fact trying to help yourself. Now, their work culture. So how does it show up in their work culture? So it's first with talk therapy, right? And then they're straddling this analog and digital expectations. Analog meaning, right, that they're just as good with writing notes as opposed to taking them, writing notes in a notebook as opposed to taking them on a computer. And so this is another idea, a dynamic, and how they are straddling both worlds. Now, how this shows up now is that they become the culture translators, right? Because the bridge between what was and what is or what it's becoming, they also too are just forgotten. I mean, we say that the Gen X generation is in fact the forgotten generation. I mean, the Zennials are in fact completely dismissed, right, as a generation as whole. Um, they are prone to being the peacekeepers because they have the line of sight into the Gen X and the millennials. They understand the thinking. This is not picking sides. This is actually understanding the foundation behind all of them, why it even makes sense that one would feel the way that they do. So they are in many ways the peacekeepers and the bridge between the boomers and Gen X and the millennials and the Gen Z. Now, what they need is they need acknowledgement. They need acknowledgement for their role and their contribution to the work that they're doing, their effort. They need flexibility and they need real support, not performative. They need real support that's actually backed by actions, that's backed by safety, and it doesn't look like it's uh, that's not just lip service. Okay. All right. Now, the millennials, the mental health messaging that they have received is to be open. Why not? Talk about it. Now, I'll say largely this messaging is really for the mid to later millennials, because many of the elder millennials they are aligning a lot with the Zennials in this space, right? But the millennials have been raised to believe, or this mental health messaging is that to be self-aware before you are projecting your mental health or projecting your emotions or feelings on others, but instead to be first self aware, to understand how it is that you are, in fact, showing up in this space, right? To be productive and in this space, so to be a contributor into the work that you are part of. Right now, the work culture looks like this overachievers, right? We know that they are the highest of any generation measured so far, for the highest educations, right? For advanced degrees that have been received for of any of the generations. I think it's about 42%, right? They also too were raised on this toxic positivity, right? That it was very optimistic that things can, yes, although there may be terrible moments, although there may be some challenges, things will always get better, right? And and also too, this balance between the hustle culture. So they will burn that midnight oil. They will do everything to achieve the goals that they are working towards. And that's also too why there's friction in the workplace because they are working very hard to achieve many of those goals for their career that we know that boomers recognize and they appreciate is that long hours lead to earning your dues, and that's how you climb the corporate ladder. But they also too are feeling really stalled, right? Or gaslit in many ways in the workplace. So that's impacting their mental health. They are certainly showing up ready and willing to contribute, and they are contributing. They are putting in the time and the effort. They are reading the playbook, doing everything. And also to experiencing that it's not getting them the payoff that they thought that they would, or or what they had been promised. How this is showing up now, right, is that this burnout is masked by their performance. They are literally pushing through. They are said, "This is what I've been told, so this is what I'm doing. Why isn't this working?" They are expressing their needs, but they're feeling guilted for it, right? They're calling out what they need to be successful. They are looking for support from their leaders, and they're also to experiencing this friction or this constraint around why they cannot have it, right? They're feeling like when they speak up, that all it's doing is actually leading to, a consequence for their career. What they need is they need rest without having to prove themselves, right? With having not having to have to earn it in order to take the rest. Rest is a right. It's not a privilege, right? We are humans. We are not machines. They need to normalize check-ins without this weaponizing of the information that they're sharing, right? They need the ability to be able to be vulnerable in a space with their leaders to say, listen, everything is not all good, right? And to be able to let their hair down in that way and not have it used against them at some later time simply because they were willing to be vulnerable in the space. Okay, now lastly, let's get into Gen Z. Gen Z, how they're receiving this mental health messaging. Let's remember, most of the parents of Gen Z are Gen Xers, right? They are uh, the second half, if you will, of Gen X are the parents for Gen Z. So they are receiving this message to protect your peace at all costs, to speak up when you feel that something is not right for you, right? That you have a voice and bring it to the workplace. This is why it's causing an awful lot of friction in the workplace, is because every prior generation are kind of like, wait, hold up. What are you talking about? I can bring voice to these concerns or, to this space, right? They are being told not to settle. If they're unhappy, then to leave. Now, foundationally, there are reasons why they feel empowered to do that, and not just because that, their parents might have empowered them to. eh, Think of one reason, right? When it comes down to a level of responsibilities that every generation has, let's just pull debt as an example. Boomers practically no debt, Gen X the highest debt of all of the generations, Zennials unmeasured because it's between both of the generations. Millennials are second in line on debt, and that's widely due to their educational achievements. Gen Z practically none. Practically none. So they if you use debt as a factor for why anyone would feel bought into or obligated to take an action, it doesn't exist for Gen Z simply because they know that they have the option. They don't have the uh they don't have anything, the anvil around their ankle tying them down, right? They in the work culture, they expect transparency. They expect safe spaces, the ability to be vulnerable and to say what it is that they need, not to be disrespectful, but to be heard, right? They expect that psychological safety from day one and not something that has to be earned, right? Or they have to constantly speak about and challenge in the workplace and demand. How this shows up today is that they will leave very quickly if they do not feel supported, right? This is that empowerment. This is not entitlement. This is empowerment. And I want you to see how I call Gen Z the canary in the coal mine because they are bringing voice, bringing light to all of the things that we have been managing over time that, in fact, are no longer serving any of us. But we've perpetuated these norms that are outdated. We are executing a playbook that is outdated and no longer serves our generations, no longer serves our workplace. They also too they demand accountability and emotional intelligence. This is what is going to help us all be able to take the right next steps together. They are not demanding anything that does not benefit all of us. In fact, I see posts all the time and messaging around pausing, around pivoting, around reclaiming, around pouring back into ourselves, giving ourselves grace, giving ourselves permission. Gen Z embodies all of this. And there's no reason why this needs to be exclusive to our personal lives, that in fact can start to support our mental health in the workspace today. What does Gen Z need in order to be successful? They need real action. They need a culture that reflects what was promised. They need zero tolerance for that performative leadership and a reinforcement of the values. Values that are important, that align, that are one important to the organization that they can find alignment with. All right, let's move on. Okay, and I went back. So here are some signs, some warning signs really that your team is quietly struggling, right? Because people don't come out with these things. They don't necessarily say them all the time, especially if they do not feel that they have the trust established within their leadership, within their organization. They start to decrease in their participation. They are withholding their insights. They are not contributing to the conversation. They are being passive aggressive, maybe overreacting or, ignoring or untimely in their communications. They are perhaps being productive, but not engaged, right? So they're getting their work done, but they're not necessarily in their normal spirit. Okay. They are, they have higher turnover with maybe a vague exit interview response. So they're not really telling you what's going on because they're pretty much checked out. So there's either little to no response because we also too know that exit interviews are a couple things, at least in my experience. What actually is useful with the information? What's done? We already see that employee engagement surveys are not highly utilized or responded to or actions taken after. Why would it be any different to provide honest feedback in an exit interview? These are real thoughts. I've heard these things from other people and not just me. Right? So, or maybe they're having a short temper, they're snapping at their colleagues, other teammates. right? Or they're just feeling withdrawn. This is especially within the boomers and Gen X generations when they're starting to feel the pressure. They're starting to feel like their voice is not being heard, that there is no uh, they're not receiving, right? Their voice or their insights are not being received well or received at all. Now, I want to ask yourself this question. Which generation on your team may be struggling silently because you don't speak their emotional language, right? Maybe you've started to take an action that just isn't seeming to work, isn't seeming to align with how it is that they need to feel supported or successful on your team. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with just not knowing what that next step looks like or not knowing how to cross the generations in your communication to understand how to get through. But this is the conversation that starts the foundation for understanding that one that there are differences. Each of the generations are experiencing mental health in your workspace very differently. Even if you think things are going well, I would think that there's perhaps maybe not everyone on your team is feeling highly supported, right? There's always an opportunity because we know that we can be very transactional. We can be very performative, especially when we're asked how we're doing. Now, when we get this right, the ROI is just evident, right? When we reduce turnover, our retention rates are better. When our retention rates are better, we know that we don't have to spend extra added cost, right? We're anywhere from 50 to 200% of a any one position's salary is what we will spend in replacement cost, right? And that depends on the level of the position, the value of the talent that you've lost, right? When we have strong engagement, we can start to align. People are rowing in the same direction. We hit our strategic goals more easily, more timely. We have the space to be collaborative and innovative in that space. When people feel safe, when they feel supported, when they feel they have a voice in that space, they bring their best selves to work. That includes their most innovative, their most creative self into the space, and that only benefits you as an employer, as an organization. You hit your strategic goals when you have a fully engaged, fully valued team. And by building that trust, that allows you to help to repeat it as well as to attract new talent that is going to continue to help you to scale. Because mental health is not a perk. We know this. It technically, if you want to look at it through a business lens, this is a profit strategy that we cannot ignore any longer. Okay, so now you've seen what's broken and you know why it matters, but how do we start to fix it? That's where the shift begins, right? If you're ready to lead boldly or even to become more generationally aware, that actually moves this needle. It is time to talk. We need to ditch the burnout, perform, reward cycle, right? That is what is creating this friction within your workspace. We need to build a culture that is safe and not just one that's seen, right? Not one that is performative or transactional. We need to lead conversations that are not forced, that are not awkward. We need to identify the generational blind spots that are preventing us from having a team that feels supported and start cultivating the culture that we want to have, that we want to see. And if this sounds like something you want to do, you want to explore, you want to continue the conversation to see what does this look like for you on your team, for your organization, then use the QR code on the screen and let's have a conversation about how do we put together a game plan? How do we start to take next steps to look to see what this looks like specifically for your organization? Okay, so next week, as you know, we go live every Wednesday. We talk about and each month we have a different theme. This month we have been talking about mental health awareness. And next week, we're going to continue the conversation. We're going to continue this discussion, diving into mental health in the workplace. So join me next week on Wednesday, May 28th. We're going to continue this conversation and we're going to explore how to build psychological safety and not just talk about it, right? So, in closing, I want to ask you this other question. What's one thing you can shift in your next conversations with your team, with individuals on your team, in your next meeting, right? Perhaps your next feedback moment. What is one thing that you can shift in your next conversation? All right. Well, that is all for today. Thank you so very much for your time and your attention. Once again, I am Christina Green, your generational translator. This is the Generational Edge podcast, and it has been my pleasure to bring this information to you today. But of course, if you want to continue the conversation, use the QR code on the screen. Let's have a chat. Let's see what this looks like. What are the issues that you are experiencing on your team that we can start to navigate some solutions and get a resolve for you? Until next time, have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.